Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the Alfa Romeo Driver Podcast, brought to you by the Alfa Romeo Owners Club. I'm Guy Swarbrick, and this afternoon we'll be continuing our conversation with Johnathan Griffin, moving on to the subject of his racing career and the work that he does with the board to develop the Alfa Romeo Owners Club sections. Welcome back, Johnathan.
Hello, Guy.
So we've touched on racing a couple of times. So we had the Berliner into Giulia Super trade.
Yeah, sure. So the Giulia Super, I hadn't had a Giulia Super before, although my brother Gavin had one. He chose it as a car to use when he worked as a letting agent in Henley-on-Thames, and he had been driving a two-door car, and the letting agent said, "Oh, you really need a four-door car to take customers around." So of course his choice was a four-door Giulia Super.
Probably not the Volvo that his boss had.
No, probably not. But anyway, so I knew about Giulia Supers, and I'd been in a Giulia Super, and although it wasn't quite what I sort of envisioned, it was by no means a poor substitute. In fact, it turned out to be fantastic. The car was in its original white, Bianco Spino, and it was in very good shape. The guy I bought it from was called Johnathan Smith, who lives in Norwich, and was very active on the racing scene, racing Morris Minors, and then a left-hand drive Giulia TI Super replica, which was a very authentic replica. And it is an excellent driver, and I thought he would be a good guy to prepare the Super as well. So I left it with him, and I thought, well, I need to have an engine and gearbox. And I looked around, and I found the remains of a crashed car for sale. And funnily enough, it was the remains of a Berliner that had been raced by Paul Jaggard, who's been very active in the club over the years. And Paul, unfortunately, had totaled his Berliner and taken the bits off it. And I was lucky enough to be able to go and buy the running gear. So I had an engine that had been rebuilt by BLS in Lincolnshire, who are often more associated with flat four boxer motors. The gearbox as well was good, and it also had an Alibars cage, which was perfect. It just needed, the front part of the cage just needed cutting down a bit, and then it fitted straight into the Giulia cabin. So with those things delivered to Johnathan, the car began to take shape pretty quickly. The cage went in, the running gear went in, and at the time, to get racing, you only needed pretty minimal preparation. You had to fireproof the bulkhead, put some extra return springs on the carburetors. You needed an extinguisher and a race seat and harness, and you put some tape on the headlights. You had some racing tyres, and there wasn't a great deal of extra prep that you needed. And I can't tell you, anyone out there who has raced a car or has been on a track day will know that it's very exciting to drive a car at speed without the restrictions of junctions and traffic coming the other way or pedestrian crossings or whatever it might be. It's very freeing to be able to take a car through a series of bends knowing that that's all you need to concentrate on. But racing adds another dimension. And of course, you're sat on the grid with who knows how many others. I think on the first race I did, there were maybe about 28 or 30 cars. And that race was at Snetterton. I had done my ARDS test to get my license, got all the safety kit I needed, helmet and overalls and things, and went out for practice at Snetterton, clipped all the apexes, braked as late as I could for the corners, turned in smoothly. Fantastic. I thought, this is great. Then I got the timesheet, and I think I was 2 from the back, which I shouldn't have been disappointed at all. I wasn't disappointed. It was great. But I think it just reinforces to you that there is a lot to motor racing. You don't just think, oh, I can drive well on the road, I'm going to be a fast driver on the track. There's a lot more to it than that. And I learned that over subsequent races. I can't even remember what happened in that first race. I finished, and I think I maybe made up a place or something like that. So it was good fun. It was great. The first thing is that you meet a lot of people who are equally enthusiastic. So that is a great motivator. People give you a lot of encouragement. They're delighted that you're there. Everyone knows how much effort it takes just to be there on the grid with a car, let alone performing to your maximum. So no, it was a great experience and an addictive one. Something that once you've done it, you can easily see that you'd like to do it again and again and again. Which I did. I became fully committed to racing. The first races I did were actually racing against other classic Alphas. the Alpha Championship, it was at the time, was a really great place to start off your racing career. There were lots of other youngish guys who were very keen, and the diversity of cars was really strong. So it was divided into different classes. So you had the unmodified front wheel drive and rear wheel drive. Then you had road going modified. So essentially the same as the other classes, but with hotter engine. And then you had bigger engine cars, so 3-litre cars. And then you'd have the modified classes as well. So you have very fast 33s, but then you could have very fast GTV6s or 75 turbos, that sort of thing. So a fantastic mix. And because it was class racing with the standard production cars mixing it with the modified cars, you'd always get the situation where a few laps into the race, this would be me trailing around near the back. I could see in my rearview mirror someone like Roberto Giordinelli in his absolute beast of a Bertone with a 500 brake horsepower turbocharged Integrale engine closing me down, and or it would be Chris Snowden in an ex-dealer team GTV6, and of course you very politely move out of the way if that's the appropriate thing to do and let them go by. But as time goes on, everybody really wants to try their best, and you become more competitive. You know your car and what it can do better. Perhaps you become a little braver. You learn the circuits more accurately, so you know that you can take a corner flat or that you can brake a bit later. And all of those little gains add up to really great general improvement. So I know from the first time I raced my Super at Snetterton to the last time. So in the last time in the same car, I was probably, I don't know, I was probably 15 seconds a lap faster, something like that. It's really quite amazing. But even when you've been racing quite a lot as a club competitor, it's interesting when someone even better joins in. And there were occasionally, a driver would make a guest appearance in the Alpha Championship. And I remember Eugene O'Brien racing a couple of times in an Alpha, I think it was in an Alpha 33, and turned up at Cadwell Park. And despite not having driven the Alpha before, as far as I'm aware, he was quickest overall immediately, because I suppose someone like that just lives and breathes racing, and they know the circuits like the back of their hand, and they know their own limits right up to 99.9%. So it's always something to remind you that you can always get better with these things, and that practice is a great way to improve your performance.
So that's how it all started. Tell us a little bit about how your career progressed and why you gave it all up in the end.
So after that first race in the Giulia, I raced with the Alfa Romeo Championship through till 2001, I think was my last race, the championship. And after that, I actually took the car in a different direction, because increasingly I'd been racing against cars with fuel injection and 16 valves in class. So when I started off, there were 2000 GTV Bertones, there were Alfetta saloons and Giulietta 116 series saloons. But when I ended up, it was just me against Alfa 75s and 156 and 155 16 valve 2 litres. And so trying to make the old car give its best against those was becoming increasingly difficult. And so funnily enough, I took the car to A.D. Hawkins and I said, I want to take it historic racing. So we made some changes. Changed the engine for a worked engine. A.D. worked his magic. Different carburetors, high lift cams, high compression pistons, and a special limited slip diff on the back. And we tweaked the suspension as well. And off I went out to play in the Top Hat Series, Julius Thurgood's Top Hat Series. And that was great. Instead of racing against the 75s and the Twin Sparks, I was racing against genuine Auto Delta GTAs and many other cars. It was a complete change around. And we had to run on Dunlop historic racing tyres, the Crossply racing tyres, which are tall, narrow, and have very little grip compared to the radial racing tyres. So again, they suit the character of the car very well. It's much more about handling rather than the grip. So you can throw the car into a corner and just send the back out one way and turn into it and hold it on the power through the corner. And that is one of the most exhilarating feelings. It's a bit like a cross between, I don't know, motor racing and ice skating. Very enjoyable, lots of fun.
I've got some fantastic pictures of Alex Jupe in a Giulia saloon at the Silverstone Classic from last year, doing that corner after corner after corner. And it just, even as a spectator, you can tell how much fun he's having.
Well, exactly. Alex would know full well then exactly that feeling. It's amazing that the car will slide like that through corners on those tyres. But then that is what they're designed to do, and it does recapture the spirit of historic racing, and is perhaps much more true to the sort of experience that you'd have had as a driver and as a spectator looking at those cars back in the day. I had a little bit of a break due partly to work pressure and partly to adding a couple more to the family, and I returned to racing in I think it was about 2012. The Alpha Club tied up with the CTCRC, the Classic Touring Car Racing Club, and we did a number of races, and that was great fun. Prepped the car again, didn't change the mechanical spec, just tidied it up and renewed the safety equipment, and except that I did run on radials rather than on the Crossply racing tyres. And again, that was fantastic fun, dicing with people like Richard Merrill, and funnily enough, a whole host of guys who'd raced Alphas back in the Club Championship days, which for me was quite a bit earlier. It was also nice racing on mixed grids with other cars, non-Alphas. I remember a finish at Brands Hatch where I was desperate to stay ahead of a 2.8 injection Capri, and I could see that a Rover 3.5 was catching him, and I slightly lost traction coming out of the last corner before the start-finish straight at Brands, and tried to hold my line as steadily as I could, and over the finish line it was 1, 2, 3, the Capri, the Rover, and then me, all covered by about half a second. Didn't quite hold them off, but tremendous fun and really good driving and very memorable.
And I think, if I remember correctly, one of your racing highlights came in one of those Top Hat races.
One of those races at the Ferrari and Maserati Festival at Donington Park in 2003. It was very exciting qualifying, and I ended up, I think, 6th on the grid in a nice field of historic Alphas, with a guy called Paul Wallace on pole. And blow me, when the light went green, I got a great start, and I slid down the inside of him into Redgate, and I took the lead from 6th on the grid. And I held on to it, I think, for about 5 laps until he drafted past me down the start-finish straight. But I held on to him, and I was three seconds down after about I can't remember whether it's 20 or 25 laps, but I finished second, and I got driver of the day and a photo in Classic and Sports Car magazine with one to watch, it said, which was hugely exciting. But the reason that's interesting is it's the only race I've ever led in my career, because I was always racing in the standard production class, and so the modified cars would come past. But it was a great feeling nonetheless to look down into Redgate or down through the Craners and see no one in front of you, know that you're leading the race. It was yes, something I like to relive now and again.
With Julius having successfully started his HRDC Alpha Challenge, any plans to come out of retirement again?
I would love to. Julius keeps sending me the invites. I mean, I'm sure he would love me to join the fun with everybody else. At the moment, the racing car is resting, and I would need to do a little bit of work to it to get it sorted. But also, I have a couple of other priorities with cars to get them sorted before I go racing. So I'm hoping so is the answer, but I haven't quite managed it yet.
And is that monster engine from the rally car still sitting on a shelf somewhere, or has that gone?
No, I still have that. That's waiting for the right car to go into. It's not a road engine. It is far too powerful and peaky to be used, to tootle up and down to an Alpha show. It really needs to go into something that deserves it. So perhaps some sort of GTAM type replica, or maybe a racing car. We will see.
Obviously, through the racing, you'll have got more involved with the club. You also got quite heavily involved with the local section. How did that come about?
Back in the 80s, I'm trying to think that there wasn't a local section for the Thames Valley. Well, I was living in Berkshire, but there was not a section at the time. But there was a guy who was, funnily enough, who was racing in the Alfa Romeo Championship, who lived just up the road, and he thought it would be a great idea to start a local section. I think in part he thought it would give him exposure to people locally who might be interested in his business. So he thought it was a good idea, and several of us agreed, and so we started what was called the Berkshire section at some point in the late 80s. But the guy who'd been involved with his business moved on, and yes, I met John Timms, who lives not far from Reading, and Michael Haynes, who lives just north of Reading, and a couple of other people. And we started meeting regularly in Wokingham, and then later on at the Seven Stars pub at Knoll Hill, just between Wargrave and Maidenhead. And so, yes, the Berkshire section became an established section with a section secretary and everybody that you needed, and we had some great events. The Seven Stars is no longer with us, sadly. It's now housing. But the old landlord there was a big car enthusiast. He hosted a number of car clubs, and because of that, got a lot of attention locally, and we had some quite big meetings there. It was nice. Into the 90s, and it became clear that the Berkshire tag was a little bit self-limiting. So we decided to change it to Thames Valley, which was a good move because the meetings are still in that neck of the woods between Wargrave and Maidenhead on the A4 at the Bird in Hand, when we're able to meet in pubs. And that has proven to be quite a good central location drawing people in from as far away as West London. We have someone who comes from Pinner quite often, Andrew Shemery, and people who come down from near Oxford, and further west we've had people from Abingdon area, and south as well. Occasionally people pop along from other sections as well. We have people coming along from Surrey sometimes. So it is reasonably central and has proven to be good. Over the years, a number of people have been the section secretary. I've done a turn. John Timms has done a turn, and Nick Souter has done a turn quite recently, and he's now 75 registrar. Dave Slorak did a turn, and most recently Kirsty Hodson has taken over this year, and we wish her well with carrying on the good works of the Thames Valley section.
We've talked a lot about your history and your involvement with the section. When did you get involved with the main board?
That's interesting, yes. Yes, the way the Alpha Club works, obviously there is a managing committee, the AROC board, and the numbers of people on the board have fluctuated over the years, but have sort of reached a steady state now. But occasionally someone leaves and they need someone else to step in. I was actually invited to join the board as a very long-standing member, and I thought about it for a short while, and I was happy to accept, and that was March 2019. So I've been involved at a higher level with the management decisions of the club for, yes, just over a year and a half. And it is quite an insight joining the management team, because you realise there are a lot of things that have to happen behind the scenes to make a club run. And there are things that have to be done, and there are things that you would like to motivate to be done. So I think the club's lucky in that it has a strong leadership. It has a great club manager in Nick Wright, who he does a tireless job in keeping on top of all the things that need to be done day to day. Managing the membership database and all the things arising from that is quite a big task, and that needs to be done accurately and professionally. And then fielding all the questions that come in from members is quite a substantial job in itself, and that is done well. But of course, everyone else is on the committee is a volunteer, and some of the guys have been there for many years, and their experience and enthusiasm shines through. John Griffiths is a very good chairman, I think, in my opinion, and gives time to everybody.
His enthusiasm shines through because he spends so much time polishing that and everything else.
That's right. Well, everyone has to have their foibles, and John's a good guy. But without running through a list of people, the people who comprise the board bring different strengths and different experience, and that helps us broadly make the right decisions for the future of the club. And that includes obviously running events, because that's what many members think of when they think of the club. It includes producing the magazine, and of course you know more about that than I do as editor of Alfa Romeo Driver. But the magazine is the jewel in the crown of the club, and I think maintaining the quality of that is one of the most important things that the club can do, because it is something that everybody receives, and it's a great way to share the Alpha stories and the Alpha information that we would all like to see. And it provides a lasting legacy as well, and it being translated into an archive as well allows people to dip in and out more effectively. Even if they've not been a member for very long, they can see what the club's been about for many years. My own involvement, Guy, was, it was interesting to be asked to get more involved with the development of sections for the club. And Grant Richardson is involved with me there. We sort of share the duties, but that's quite a challenge. Any national club needs to try and organise the members around the country in such a way that they can get the best from the club. And that's what we are endeavouring to do. But it's quite a task, partly because the distribution of club members members across the country is not even. So there are various places in the country where there are lots of members and others where there are hardly any at all. So it's difficult to compare one area with another sometimes because there just aren't the alpha owning members.
I know one of the things that has happened over the last few months is there's at least one section that's been started or restarted. Tell me a little bit about what happened in Derbyshire.
Oh, yes. Yes, Derbyshire had been fallow for a little while. The existing secretary had to step down for personal reasons or pressure of work. And we were lucky that a very keen chap stepped forward and said that he would be interested in taking on the role of section secretary. And so that was Paul Mitchell. And so I provided him with the startup information, and he still seemed keen to go ahead, despite once he'd understood what it actually involved. And he has had a lot of support from John Griffiths, actually, in the East Midlands, and advice generally about how to set up a successful section. So, which he's managed to do. He's secretary, and he's got an active chairman in Alex Black, and a couple of other guys, James Fernley doing events, and Adrian Richardson on publicity. So those guys met up in the pub in Derbyshire and said, yes, we're going to restart the section. And Paul was a little bit unsure. He didn't know how many people were going to turn along, and I think maybe the first meeting they had a handful, but then the next meeting they had double, and I think the meeting after that they had about 20 plus people turning up. So it is an example of how someone's enthusiasm can infect other people and encourage them to take a more active part in the running of the section, because after all, the central club cannot make a section successful. It does rely on members in that area to decide that that's what they'd like for themselves. We can encourage them and provide the tools and the forum for making it happen, so they have a framework, but someone actually needs to be prepared to put in a few hours to contact local members, talk to them about what the club provides and what national events are available, organise a programme of local events, starting with a monthly pub meet and perhaps some events at the weekend. And you can build it from there. And of course, interaction with neighbouring sections is another way of building a larger event. And I think more sections are hoping to do that in the future.
And I think you can see some of that kind of member initiation from the names and the areas covered by the sections, when you've got things like Goodwood and West Wiltshire and Scotland, where there's a huge contrast in terms of the geographic coverage.
That's right. And clearly some of the sections have evolved because there's a group of enthusiasts centred around a certain part of the country. And so, yes, if it's West Wilkes, they'll say, let's have a West Wilkes section. Quite difficult in Scotland because the number of members, although they're very keen in Scotland, they are spread out quite a lot. And the commitment to meet is a huge one because of the geography. But still, they do very well up there and manage to arrange a very successful Scottish-Italian card day most years. And so things are working well across most of the sections. Clearly, there will be some sections with smaller membership where it's more difficult to organise meetings, and they may therefore have a smaller programme of events. And the larger sections, I'm thinking East Midlands is a great example. They have a tremendous calendar of events. And of course, being quite central, it's not too far for them to travel to quite a few different events, whether they're Alpha Club specific events or others. And that's an advantage. If you're down in Cornwall, it's a long drive to get away from your local events. So it's a commitment for anyone in a far-flung corner to pick up and attend that sort of event.
So those are the areas that are covered. When you look at the membership and the geography of the country, are there any areas that you think we really should have a section there and we haven't?
That's a good question. If you think about some of the large suburban areas or the large conurbations, I mean, there is an existing London section, although we've just recently lost our section secretary for London. So we're on the lookout for someone else to take on the mantle of section secretary there. But it's quite difficult, I think, to run a section in a large city, partly because of the difficulty of moving around. When in London, there's so much traffic, the roads are so convoluted, it's quite difficult to say that any one point in London is a really great place for everyone in London to meet because of the number of people and the size of the place. But the same could be said of Manchester and I guess Birmingham and some other cities in the country. We don't have a Manchester section or a Birmingham section per se, and I'm not quite sure what the solution is there. We had thought in London maybe of rotating a meeting point around the capital, so perhaps picking 4 meeting points and saying, right, we are going to have a meeting in the northwest, and the next time have it in the southeast, and so on, so that Alpha owners in different parts of London could make a shorter trip to a section meeting. But it is one of those more difficult nuts to crack, I must admit.
We've dived into some of the detail of how sections are organised, but given the role you have and your history with the club, what do you actually see as the role of sections? What are sections
Obviously,
for?
Before social media, sections existed to give groups of Alpha Club members, who are by definition Alpha enthusiasts, the opportunity to meet up, exchange ideas, share the joy of ownership, and maybe a couple of pints and a pie of a Sunday lunchtime. Sections also communicate national events to the membership, which is important. Everybody needs to know what's going on. So in combination with the magazine, years ago, you'd get your information from your local section secretary and by meeting people locally. In more modern times with email and social media, clearly a lot of people perhaps feel that they don't want to go to a section meeting and that they get their interactions via Facebook. The club has a strong Facebook presence and there are individual groups for each or for most of the sections. So if you want to talk to members in your section, you can do it there. But I think that misses the point that face-to-face interaction is something slightly different. So turning up at a pub of a sunny evening in June or July and strolling outside with a drink in your hand and talking with other enthusiasts about their cars, that's not something you can do so authentically over social media. So I think that the section meeting still has a place. And I think people in different parts of the country are quite proud of their sections. They're proud of their geography and they like to be different from other people. So clearly there are all sorts of divides in any country, but I'm sure people in Wales like to feel very different from people in England and people in Scotland, people in Northern Ireland. And likewise, if you're from the West Country, you probably like to feel very different from someone in, say, Yorkshire. So yeah, I think there's still a strong place for sections. And I hope that the membership will continue to support their local sections.
So last question, and I didn't give you this one in advance, so I appreciate you've not had any chance to prepare for this. If eventually you'll move on and do something else with the board, if you've achieved 3 things in terms of the development of sections, what are the 3 things that would allow you to move on from that role and look back and say, yeah, that was a worthwhile time?
I think it would be nice to feel that the sections that we have all have a group of people running them who are happy in their roles and committed to getting the best from their local section. That would be something. And there is a little bit of work to do there because when people understandably move on, sometimes it's either difficult to find someone or the people there are a little bit reluctant to take on the responsibility because of time pressures. So that would be one thing. I think that if we could crack London, that would be good, because looking at the way the membership is distributed across the country, there are quite a few members in London. And there must be a way to get them to meet up and feel enthusiastic about that, even if it's by making meetings at a weekend, say, or centering them around other events to make it more attractive. That would be good. And I think it would be really great if sections could interact with their neighbours more often. There's really good possibilities for joint events, or perhaps for travelling in groups to national events. And I think, yes, if there was more appreciation of your neighbours, that would go quite a long way to improving the success of quite a few events.
I think it absolutely would. So thank you very much for taking the time to share your thoughts on the future direction of the sections and tell us a little bit about your car ownership history and your racing career. I've enjoyed every minute of it, and I'm sure everybody else has too.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Guy. Thank you.
That's it for this episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time on the 25th of October, available to download from 1:30 from iTunes, Podbean, Podcast Addict, and all the other good places you can find podcasts. Until then, stay safe.